in Granville, Massachusetts, known for the Granville Country Store, which has been in operation for quite some time. Now, Granville is a sleepy, near Berkshire community. It's not quite in the Berkshires, it's in Hampden County. But if you're just about geography and thinking about the Berkshire Hills, it's in the Berkshires. Granville is also one of Massachusetts' hill towns, meaning the center of Granville is up on top of a hill. Now, that's not normal in Massachusetts. Massachusetts town centers are typically along rivers. When you got a hill town like the one we have here, your town center is on a high point. Chester being an example. And we got some markers here from the various jubilees, the community jubilees. Pretty cool. The old meeting house, 1802. But we're not here to see the old meeting house. We're here to check out some cemeteries. Here's another one of Granville's great spots to visit, the North Street Cemetery. And it's a tragedy that I got here when I did, because you can see the honey mushrooms that have gone to pass, and I didn't get to harvest them, but here's Spellman and Coolies. There's a lot of Spellmans and Coolies in Granville town history, and the Noble and Cooley drum factory behind me is an example of some of the things they accomplished. Selectmen. In New England, we have boards of selectmen. We have what's called the town meeting system, and 3 selectmen are chosen by the voters of the community to guide the town in lieu of the vote of the town meeting. This one over here, I wanted to show you. This is the grave of a member of the Barnard family, Barnard. And it's Charles Barnard, who was killed by a shaft in a local mill, 1883. 9 years old. He's a young boy. And he must have been too close to the workings of the mill, and this is really a sad stone showing us tragedy. And tragedy really seems to fill the cemeteries of America's 18th and 19th centuries. Gowdy here, Hamilton's. And I particularly like this cemetery because it's set in a beautiful spot. You have fields surrounding it, and there's a little mill pond over there. Very neat. And you have the various types of stone that you find all over western Massachusetts. The big obelisks are made of Connecticut Valley brownstone. Some of them better than others in terms of the quality of stone. They're holding up really well. You see a bit of marble here, actually quite a lot of marble, and these stones haven't been cleaned. So we're looking at a project, I guess, for somebody that's interested in cleaning stones. I don't know if it's better to clean the stones or not clean the stones. Some of you might know. Woodlands Cemetery. Here. Don't go in there if you're under 18 because the police will take notice. Look at some of these stones up here, though. But you'll notice that most of the stones in this cemetery are from the early to mid 19th century. And as I say, they're still burying people here, but it's generally a 19th century graveyard. Not a churchyard. There's no church nearby, so it's a graveyard. Now this is Granville's Old Main Street Cemetery, and we're going to see some really old burials in here. Quite a sad place. We have a gate that swings open with a little bit of assist, and we're going to walk in here and we're going to see again Connecticut Valley brownstone, marble, lime. Here's a Ephraim Howe, 1806. Cheerful I felt on heavenly fruit, and drink the pleasure down, pleasures that flow hard by the foot, of the eternal throne. A lot of epitaphs in this cemetery, if I remember correctly. And you'll also notice there's quite a lot of flags decorating the stones here. You're going to see quite a lot of them. Mr. Amos Clark, right here. And Amos Clark, I have a story about Amos Clark, but I'm not going to tell it yet. You can walk over here, and again, you see the brownstones and the marbles. The marbles probably coming down from Lee, Massachusetts, I would imagine. Some beautiful work. And when you visit an old cemetery, I would recommend that you do it when the sun's getting low, because you can see how it's really casting shadows, making it easier to read the names on the graves. This is really pretty. In memory of Captain Bella Bancroft, died in 1822 at 36 years old. I would imagine that he was a captain in the War of 1812. Behold, we see, while here we look, the dearest lies of friendship broke. Though grief and sorrow pierce the heart, the dearest friends we see must part. Interesting. I hope I read it properly. Had a little bit of a stammer, a little bit of a stutter. There's a lot of Revolutionary War dead here. Now, we were just looking at a Bancroft. There's a lot of Bancrofts here. Right here, we can see a classic Angel of Death, crowned, and then in 18th century style writing, in memory of Deacon Julius Rose, who died September 23rd, 1781, at, what does it say, 58 years old? And then we have an epitaph. And I've done a little research on Julius and the other burials here, and quite a lot of them, like Julius, were what we would call Minutemen, or militia members. And when the Revolutionary War began, our friend Deacon Rose, from one of the founding families of Granville, Deacon Rose was called up after the firing at Lexington and Concord, and probably went out and served for a time in the siege of Boston, which is particularly interesting. And it's the case of many of the burials here. When you see a grave that's marked by a flag, by the DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution, did the research, and they marked the graves, they're marking loyal militiamen, so they're not looking for any members of the militia that are Tories. They're looking for men that turned out against the British. And that's the interesting thing about the Revolutionary War. You had militias that were divided, and those that turned out for the Patriot cause become Minutemen. The numbers of Minutemen are going to go up in the local militias as it becomes seen that the cause is a good one and succeeding, especially here in Massachusetts. It's probable that a lot of these gentlemen weren't ardent patriots early in the war. William Peters, 1825, age 79. And here, Lemuel Bancroft, July 18th, in the year 1801. A husband kind and parent dear, a faithful friend, lies buried here. There's some good epitaphs up here. We've got a neat multiple burial here. One stone, and you can see it's sadly deteriorating. I'm not going to touch it because I don't want to make it flake off, but that's the problem we're having with a lot of this Connecticut Valley brownstone. It ought to look like this burial right here that has survived so well so far. The marble's none the worse for wear. We don't see it cracking and falling apart, but we do see the marble starting to lose its luster, its sharpness, because it's soluble to acid rain. This is a particularly interesting stone, especially when you take a look at the big white pine behind it. And remember, the white pine is the symbol of the cause of liberty in the American Revolution. The Bunker Hill flag, the Appeal to Heaven flag are both flags that feature white pines. This is the tree that really fired up a lot of people in the Northeast when the king decided to claim any tree, I can't remember, larger than 26 inches in diameter for his ship's mast, and deny the New Englanders their rights, as they saw it, to take the natural resources and raw materials that surrounded them. This would be reserved for the king. And here it stands in the cemetery, and I want you to think about the historical value of this cemetery and the graves down beneath it, and then think about those branches. And when you get a heavy snowstorm, and we're supposed to get a blizzard in a couple days here, get 15 inches of wet snow, and those white pine branches snap and come down, and you're looking at the loss of some beautiful stones. And here is Mr. Asa Burt buried, who was killed by the fall of a tree. And wouldn't it be an awful tragedy if his stone was just mashed into dust by a big white pine when Asa himself is buried here because of a tree. And he died in 1777, the year of Saratoga, killed by the fall of a tree. Holy cow. It's beautiful here. We're on the southwest face of the cemetery, so you can see that the snow has melted, and we have another burial here, 1838, 79 years old, another Revolutionary War veteran, or War of 1812 veteran, Bildad Gibbons. I haven't researched him. That's the thing about doing cemetery research now in the age of the internet. It's a lot easier than it used to be. As you can see, beautiful, multiple burials in here. And this is really something, considering what is true about Granville's other cemetery. I'm walking under that white pine. It's like a mousetrap. I hope I make it. I don't know if I'm out of trouble yet. But the point is, oh, look at the sad state of affairs that these stones find themselves in, as that Connecticut Valley brownstone just smolders and literally decays before our eyes. Every winter and every storm, water gets in there, it freezes, it bulges. This is almost gone completely, isn't it? So as we stand in this beautifully marked and laid out 18th and early 19th century cemetery, right above Route 57 West, you have to think about the other cemeteries that Granville is purported to have that are completely lost. It was during the Revolutionary War, during the period that many of our friends who are buried around us served, that militia were constantly being called up and sent, for instance, out to Boston at Lexington and Concord, down toward New York City during Washington's summer campaign, up in 1777 towards Stillwater in the Saratoga campaign. The militias were constantly being called up to actually serve. And when we think about that, they serve for the time, then they're released, they come home. And what ended up happening was epidemics. Now, if you know the military and the way disease affects soldiers, when a soldier musters in, or when a group of soldiers is first brought together, there's what's called childhood disease affliction that hits the men that are generally farm boys, and now they're clustered together in the confines of an army camp in, tents, 4 men to a tent. And they've never been in such close quarters before. And they'll end up getting the childhood diseases that they didn't get, that they missed when they were kids, and they'll get them as young adults or older adults, and they'll be deadly. We're talking about things like the mumps and measles and pertussis or whooping cough, and also, of course, diphtheria, which was a terrible scourge in the 18th century. Diphtheria epidemic swept New England. They're conveniently forgot about. It's so weird how fast people forget about epidemics. There'd be the terrible wave of childhood diseases, and after that passed, there'd be another wave of what are called camp diseases, and that would be diseases of bad water, like dysentery and typhus fever and Shigella and Giardia and all that good stuff. So when the militias came back, they would often be quarantined for a time so that these afflictions wouldn't spread in the larger community. I mean, they were very conscious of how bad diseases could be. I mean, it was every dozen years or so that a smallpox epidemic would roll through Massachusetts, starting in, I believe it was 1640 something, 1647, something like that. There's a smallpox epidemic. And depending on who you read, I mean, epidemiologists would actually say that the epidemics were caused by the rapid influx of immigrants to Massachusetts and New England, and these immigrants would come in without having caught smallpox. So when the numbers got to a certain level, bam, they'd get it. Well, I'm babbling away, and I'm not talking about the lost cemeteries of Granville, one of them being a smallpox cemetery, where victims of a smallpox epidemic that occurred in the American Revolution were buried. Maybe a dozen to 20 burials, originally buried under wooden crosses, lie on one of the mountains. Buried on the mountain is all we know. And then, of course, there's the Camp Distemper Cemetery. I'm sure some of our friends that are buried behind me would have known quite a lot about it. And I'm sure they had friends and loved ones that are buried there. The Camp Distemper Cemetery, probably a common grave of burials from around 1776, 1777. Soldiers coming back from the call-ups end up dying of something, but they're somewhere on the mountain. Are we talking about Sodom Mountain? Or are we talking about what might aptly be named Bad Luck Mountain? You can see silhouetted behind the house there. We don't know. We don't know where they are. And it's really interesting. The DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution, basically went through hell and high water to mark these graves. And there's 2 graveyards that contain Revolutionary War veterans that have not been found. We're going to need to find those. So I'm going to be doing some research and some wood walking. Not that I don't do that anyway. This year to see if I can find the 2 lost cemeteries of Granville. And I know some of you that watch my channel are local people, and maybe we should put our thinking caps on and work something out together. But it's something that needs to be done. Where are these burials located?